like to call to order this work session of the Boulder Valley School District. Laura, could you please call the roll?
Garcia.
Here.
Gephardt.
Here.
Niznik.
Here.
Rajpal.
Here.
Sargent.
Here.
Sweeney Moran.
Here.
Zis.
Here.
Thank you.
Dr. Anderson, do you want to kick us off? I think we have one item on the work session agenda for tonight.
I do. Thank you, board members. Great to see you all. Tonight, before our board meeting, we have a quick work session, and we feel like that this is probably a really good idea to do at least each year, if not each semester, is to run the board through our proposed policy review schedule. Kathleen was there yesterday during our prioritization and your retreat, and so she's was able to listen into some of your priorities and work that in the schedule. So it shouldn't take very long, but we wanted to make sure that we did this with you and did this publicly so folks would know the policies that we are working on. Kathleen's got an ambitious timeline and has done a great job up to this point working through policy. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Kathleen.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Good evening, Board President Gephardt, members of the board. Nice to see you again. Here to talk about policy, everybody's favorite scintillating topic. But there's a lot of really important guidance and information for our staff and our students and our community that comes when the board is able to really express itself in a meaningful way through policy. Dr. Anderson has set an ambitious plan to review board policies at least on a 5-year cycle. So I want to give you an overview tonight of where we are with that, a plan to catch up and get on pace, and then to talk about the priorities that the board has identified and some that have been identified by the community and staff. So board policy is divided up into chapters A through L. I provided you with a list of what those are just so you could remember them as we talk about where the real heavy lifts are in our policy. We have foundational commitments. Board governance is chapter B. We have general school administration, fiscal management, support services, and so on down through the list. When we look at the numbers, here's the chart of how many policies, regulations, and exhibits we have. We currently have 411. So although math was not my strongest subject, which is why I'm a lawyer, I can do the math. And when we look at how we've done over the past several years, we have done a lot of policy work. The board will remember, I think one of our big achievements were overhauling the student conduct policies out of the Chapter J. And we've done a lot of other work also. It totals up to 63 policies that we have reviewed and revised in the last 3 years. If we want to stay on a 5-year pace, we really need to be reviewing more like 83, 84 policies a year. So right now, with the 63 that we've looked at, we've got 348 that we would like to get to in the remaining 2 years of this 5-year cycle. I think that it's really important to look at the numbers, deal with the data, acknowledge really that the pace needs to be picked up. But we don't just go in alphabetical order when we're looking at your board policies. We start with the priorities that match this board's priorities and with the school district's strategic plan. As we know, we have had a significant focus on equity when we look at student conduct policies, looking at reducing disproportionate discipline and making sure that we have clear, objective policies is one of the methods and one of the tools that we need to use. So in the last 3 years, we really have focused on those student conduct policies. We've also focused on establishing complaint procedures that are accessible and make sense to parents, staff, and our students. So one example were our Title IX policies. Some of those changes were necessitated by changes to the federal law. But we tend to look at them in sets so that we look at all the like policies together and we can make sure that they're aligned. So with this priority focus, it means that there are times that the board is likely going to review the same policy, potentially multiple times, before we may get to something like an older facility policy that isn't necessarily aligned with our immediate priorities. So in addition to focusing on key subject areas, our other priorities are reduce and retire. We need to reduce the number of policies so that the board can effectively review them and update them, and so that your staff and community can really know, understand, and implement those policies. At some point, there's just too much detail. And we've had a lot of conversations amongst staff that some of our policies currently are more like a handbook item for a department than they are necessarily a board level policy. So we will be looking forward to identifying those and reducing and eliminating any unnecessary policies. The third priority I want to talk about is engagement. Last year, the DAC policy team did really great work. We've worked closely with DAC on some key policies like dress code, I think, when you were on DAC. And last year, the DAC policy committee really focused on a parent-family engagement policy that would be new for this board. It would be identified as policy KB. And we have some related policies that I want to make sure we get to early in this year and make sure that we're able to get those accomplished. So, with those policies in mind, I gave you two handouts. One are the slides, and then the second is this policy review schedule. And I'm going to project it so that other people who are interested can also see it. So I've tried to lay out on this schedule objectives and targets for the next 6 months. This policy schedule has 130 items that will get us closer to our 5-year review cycle. Not necessarily all the way there. I do think it's ambitious. Some things we may have to postpone or defer if we're not ready, or the board has other work that you need to do besides just policies. I do understand that. So if you look at the policy review schedule, I can make it a little bit bigger. I hope that you will see priorities that you discussed in the prioritization meeting yesterday. So we've had discussions about accountability. We know that that policy needs to be updated. That's board policy AE, so that's at the top of the list. We have a little bit of work left to do on some policies that we started last year around the board's advisory committees, making clear what are your committees and how they report to the board, what are staff committees that advise staff and the district, and other community groups, so that we can really be clear as to how those groups relate to the board. We have some urgent work to do around weather closure, so that's the ECAA policy. And then you will see on this list JECC-R, that is an open enrollment regulation. It has a significant amount of detail about how our lottery and our open enrollment process works, has a lot of detail about preschool, and there is a lot that is going to change as we come into the new year and with some new state legislation. I don't know that this will be a one-time only touch of JECC, but we do have a need to really urgently clean it up so we can be prepared for open enrollment season. Then you'll see also slated for September is the KB policy that I mentioned already, that DAC has provided a draft, and that we're working through that staff process now. We also have identified a number of policies that I think are likely ready to be retired, such as the one on asbestos. It was a really big issue there in the 70s when we adopted it. It's still important that we're careful with our materials, but probably not a board level policy. So that's the first proposal of items that we can look at trimming. As we move into October, we have some work to do with our fiscal policies. So we'll be looking at those as a group. And then policies that were identified by the board in the prioritization meeting around student organizations, athletics, activities, making sure that those policies reflect our commitments to equity and the modern approach to student activities, and they're consistent with the changes that the board made to the student conduct policies. Up in November, we will look at this issue of school board member compensation. I know that's something that the board has been looking to deal with, also as a result of changes to state law. We have some leadership policies that also have not been looked at in more than 10 years. And also slated within that group for November are the curriculum development and revision policies. Again, those were talked about by the board yesterday in our prioritization process. We also have some cleanup to do with our K policies to support Dr. Messier's amazing work around partnerships. And a little bit of cleanup to do with student records and some of our security and law enforcement related policies around video surveillance. As we move into December, probably taking a slightly slower pace because we know that's a short month. We don't have as many meetings. So a handful of policies slated there, beginning to dip into facilities. The G policies are our personnel policies. They're a weighty section of the board's policy manual. Because of our negotiated agreements and the complexity and the interrelationship of those, we're going to need to do those personnel policies just a little bit at a time. So you'll see G policies spread throughout the policy review schedule. In January, we expect that we should have some additional clarity from the federal government as to how Title IX and the proposed changes to the regulations will work. So we do expect that we'll need to bring our AC policy, which is our non-discrimination and equal opportunity policy, back to the board for some updates. You may recall that during the now I'll get the administrations confused, so I won't even mention it. But we've had a little bit swinging of the pendulum. There wasn't a ton of detail in the Title IX regulations that govern sexual harassment and sexual discrimination. We wound up with very detailed regulations that established a pretty complex hearing process that makes a lot of sense in higher education but can be difficult in K-12. The feds have looked at that again, and we've got proposed regulations out. So hopefully we will be moving back a little bit from the very technical regulations that we had with that real focus on equity and impact on our students and our staff and our programs. In February, we can look at the board's governance and operations policies. We have 25 policies in that chapter that have not been looked at in 20 years or more. A lot of them are really driven by state law around board member qualifications, elections, conflict of interest. So they may not need a lot of revision, but certainly need review so that we can move through our policy cycle. And then in March, we would be teeing up the remainder, hopefully aligned with our long-range planning committee and their work, to look at our school attendance areas, the way we assign students to schools, administrative transfer, and some of those related processes. As Dr. Anderson mentioned yesterday, one thing that we have realized in the last 3 years doing this work is that March to June for a school board is an incredibly busy time as we try and get contracts and other business and operational pieces in place for the new school year. So I have not slated any significant policy work for that time period, but we would have some space in that time if there are key priorities that the board has not yet been able to reach. How was that for a fast update? Okay. Questions?
Lisa and then Richard.
I don't have a question, but I did want to note that this isn't on board docs yet and hope that we can get that attached for everyone watching that might want to click on these policies.
We'll certainly do that.
Laura gave you a thumbs up. Richard?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation and all the hard work you're going to be doing. It's something that needs to be done, absolutely. How many policies did you say we have in our books? 400 plus?
gazillion.
We have 411 between policies, regulations, and exhibits, and this review schedule would have us looking at about 130 in the next 6 months.
Okay.
It certainly is work for me and my team. I want to make sure that we understand that it's a lot of work for other staff and community members also, because this board has been exceptionally clear that if we are bringing board policies to the board for action, that we have spent the time and done the legwork, making sure that we've spoken with our teacher advisory council, our principal advisory council, and our interested community groups, as well as any staff members with content and subject knowledge expertise.
Thank you very much. Something that is missing here that I brought up a couple of times is the community school policy. I know we've done that already, but I'd like to revisit that at some point in time, and maybe it could be done alongside with the school partnership policy.
Thank you. Yes, I agree.
Thank you.
Nicole?
Do we have a sense of how many policies we might be able to retire over time, given the ones that are required and the ones that are optional or recommended?
I would guess we could cut out at least 25%, would be my current estimate. It's possible that we could make a deeper cut than that, but I would say that's a reasonable expectation currently, and something I invite anybody who loves board policy work, please feel free to get in there and find anything that you think is not helpful or just too stale. I'm happy to add it to my proposed retirement list.
It is a fun game to find the policies that have existed prior to the time in which you were born, which I've found a few. It's a
It's
fun
true.
game if
Yes.
you have time.
But I have found, Nicole, that those are often somebody's favorite policy. And no one wants to let it go. Not you, I just, past discussions have been kind of humorous around that. Anybody else have any questions for Kathleen? Beth?
I just want to add to the chorus of gratitude. You're right, this is going to be a lot of work, and I think it's work that does need to be done. And thank you for this and for your team's attention to this.
Rob, do you have anything to add?
Just want to thank the board for the work they're going to be taking on this semester and this year. Thank you, Kathleen. Making sure that we have really strong policy that guides the direction of the district, that guides the actions of staff, I think is really, really an important aspect of being a school board member. So I appreciate how this board has embraced policy and is going to work with us. And I really appreciate Kathleen's ambition and our willingness to engage beyond this board and staff, engaging with community students. They've made the policies that I think that we have tackled that much stronger. So I want to thank our community. And I know there's community groups that probably going to want to be paying attention to these policies as we move forward. So it's important that we get that up on board doc. So thanks, everybody.
I'll just add my thanks to that. I know in talking with other school districts, we've often been the leader in the pack for changing our policies around discipline, around some of the more sticky issues. And so I really appreciate you for not being timid and wading into those and leading us through those negotiations and those discussions. Because as you say, it's so important that we have the right policies for not just for the board, but for our staff and our community. So thank you for doing that, because this is really hard work. I think people who are listening are thinking, how hard can policy be? So just watch when we dive into one of these, especially like open enrollment or some of the others. There's a lot of consequences you have to think about when you draft the policy, and you need to try to make it so that you have as few unintended consequences as you possibly can. So I just want to say thank you. So anybody else? Otherwise, I think we're not slated to begin until 6:30. We thought you'd talk slower, Kathleen.
You don't pay me by the word, so I think we're probably okay. I guess for our public that may be listening, and staff and students, I did not put on the policy review schedule, but the board talked about this when you adopted a resolution about a month ago. The board has just directed across the policy book that we make sure we update our language, that we use appropriate pronouns, we remove any of the gendered pronouns, and that we replace our really unfriendly language and some of our unintended consequences with words like citizen to community member. So we'll be doing that work as we go, in addition to the identified items on the schedule.
But because we made that across the board, you don't need to bring that to us individually. You'll just be making those changes.
That's correct. Because of the resolution that the board adopted, we'll be bringing those current and posting them with current modern language the way we want our community to understand this board's intent.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us of that. Anything else, board members? I see we have a large number of people here, but we didn't post this meeting until starting at 6:30, and I'm nervous about starting ahead of time because I think people might not log in until 6:30. So unless I'm told otherwise, I think we'll just take a break until we'll come back at 6:25 because sometimes it takes us a few minutes to settle so that we can start punctually at 6:30. Okay, thank you.